The number of unemployed in Spain breaks the 6 million barrier, rising to the highest in at least 37 years. In France, more people were out of jobs in March than at any other time in the past. Greece posted a 27.2% jobless rate for January, and the British economy narrowly avoided a triple-dip recession. So what are the prospects for the eurozone economy, and where does the root of the problem lie? I'm Homa Lesgi, and this is The Debate.
The Eurozone's overall unemployment rate has hit record levels of 12%, and the rate in some countries is twice as high. Speculation is growing about the ability of austerity in the policies of the troika of lenders to solve the debt crisis. Countries that have been hit the hardest, such as Greece and Spain, are experiencing jobless rates of over 27%, showing a sharp spike from 2008, when only about 8% of the population was out of work. The youth are among the hardest hit, with 50% reportedly unemployed.
These figures give ammunition to critics of the government's austerity policy, which it's been introducing over more than a year now. The government has been trying to slash the deficit quite aggressively, and it said it has to do that to meet EU targets. But this rising unemployment rate seems to be one of the main consequences of those reforms that it's pushing through.
The situation in Greece is expected to deteriorate as Athens has agreed to slash 15,000 public sector jobs by next year in return for another batch of bailout loans worth 8.8 billion euros to keep the economy afloat. The UN has criticized the excessively rigid demands of the troika led by Germany, saying it's making Greece fall behind on its human rights obligations. According to the international body, the austerity measures have left about 10% of the population in extreme poverty and a growing number of Greeks without health insurance. The prospects for Spain, the Eurozone's fourth largest economy, are also grim, as its GDP is expected to shrink by 1.3%, meaning more people will be pushed out of work by the end of this year.
There is increasing pressure on the government now to change tack when it comes to its economic policy and start being a bit more expansive, trying to get more credit into the economy so that companies will start hiring again, because that simply isn't happening at the moment.
The situation in France, Italy and Portugal seems to be no better, as governments are under immense pressure to slash spending and boost growth, while consumer confidence continues to fall amid job insecurity. France, the Eurozone's second largest economy, has announced recently that over 3.2 million people are jobless. A new poll shows that the French nation seems to be losing faith in the socialist government's policies to reduce unemployment, as the country faces its 23rd consecutive month of increases in job losses. There are growing fears that a euro debt crisis spillover could affect other European countries severely. Britain has recently avoided a triple-dip recession. Likewise, many other EU countries are struggling with a credit crunch. European governments have been resorting to harsh spending cuts and tax hikes, despite being warned that austerity measures combined with severe budget cuts will hamper economic recovery in the long run.
You're watching The Debate. Let me introduce our guest for you, former chairman of the European Parliamentary Labour Party, Mr. Robert Evans in London, and financial editor of Veterans Today, Mr. Mike Harris, with us on the line from Phoenix in the United States. My first question to our guests in London, Mr. Evans. Both Spain and Greece, Mr. Evans, responded to budget deficits and the stagnation they were facing with austerity measures that have hurt their economies. I'm referring to these two countries first because we're hearing reports that they're facing extreme unemployment now. And the question here is this a vicious circle whereby growth cannot be attained? Is austerity measures basically working here?
Well, I have enormous sympathy for the people in Greece, Portugal, Spain and the countries that are suffering. And I don't think we should look on this in the short term. We've got to try and look at it in the longer term. And the European countries, the member states of the euro, working together to support each other. And I certainly think that the options for the countries are very limited. If they were to withdraw from the euro, and have their own currency again, that currency would very rapidly be worth nothing at all. What I do think they can do is, within the countries, within Spain, look at measures to really promote the industries that are successful. And if you think of Spain in particular, it is the tourism trade. And if they can encourage more and more tourists, whether it's from Britain or the other countries, to come to Spain, then I think gradually they will see their economy improve. There are countries, Iceland is an example, that's had, after a very, very difficult time, I think it's 10 or 12 quarters of increased growth. So the corner can be turned, but I think the strength of Europe, the strength of the Euro countries in the long term is staying together and working together in their strength.
So you're saying that austerity can work in the long run?
Well, that's the plan. That's what is the hope is. It doesn't have to be perhaps quite as vicious as it is at the moment. The banking systems have lent so much money in Spain in particular that it is going to take a while to recover, with lots of buildings that are not complete. If they could get those building industry back to work, if, as I say, they could encourage tourism, and much better for governments to pay people to be working rather than paying unemployment benefit, that I think is the way to turn the corner.
OK, let's bring in Mike Harris now in Phoenix. Mr. Harris, I'm referring to a Washington Post editorial that said, and I'm quoting here, there's basically no evidence that fast austerity programs or ones undertaken during economic downturns are even good at reducing the debt burden. And that editorial says it's very clear they're bad for growth. Austerity through spending cuts, that writer says, may help growth in the long run, but so do a lot of other things. And if those cuts are to things known to boost growth, like early childhood education or research, they even could be counterproductive. But for the time being, he says, austerity is the wrong prescription for advanced economies. Now, would you agree with that analysis?
Well, yes and no. I think there are some other fundamental underlying problems that no one's talked about yet. And that is the banking system that we have has been woefully irresponsible. They have overlent, and they need to take a haircut. It's time for all of these countries, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, to renegotiate their debt. And I'm very pleased with what Iceland did. I'm glad the other guest mentioned Iceland, because Iceland repudiated their debt and refused to pay it, and did not bleed the lifeblood of their economy out of the country, and they're doing great right now. And I'd like to see the other countries do the same as Iceland did.
So renegotiating debt, is that, do you think, a realistic option, Mr. Evans?
Well, I'm glad that your colleague likes my reference to Iceland. We shouldn't forget, though, the Icelandic krona lost 50% of its value against the other currencies. So that's why I mentioned earlier on the strength of the euro will, in the long term, I think, support the countries. And the strength of the European Union is 27 countries working together to help each other, and help each other in difficult times as well as times when things are going well.
I'd just like to mention here again the issue of austerity concerning the previous question that I also asked. We know that there's spending cuts, there's tax increases, but Mr. Evans, a lot of people have been saying that tax increases, for instance, are negatively affecting consumer spending and thus economic growth. And eventually lower tax receipts will widen the deficits, and this illustrates the futility of austerity measures, they say. Are they, do you think, making matters worse?
Well, countries have got to have tax receipts. I do see both sides of the argument very strongly. If we look in Greece there was it seems over many years, a custom or a habit of not paying taxes, or looking at tax avoidance on a massive scale. And that, for a long time, created the problem that came home to them in the last few years. So there are problems with austerity measures. I don't think for 1 minute anybody is going to say that is the magic answer to things. Okay. I think that the European Union does need to look at a much longer game on the repayment of debt, though I agree with your correspondent in America.
But let's see if both of you agree on the root of the problem. Mike Harris, what do you think is the root of the problem there? You referred there to the banking sector. Do you think that that is the root problem, and what should be done to tackle it?
Well, I think that the banking sector has been very irresponsible in their lending practices for the past several decades. In the U.S. in particular, since the repeal of Glass-Steagall, the banks have been very irresponsible. They've overlent, and they don't have a sound economic model from which to collect what is owed to them now. So the banks have to realize that they've made some severe mistakes and that they're going to lose money because of their bad decisions.
Right.
Now,
and
the other thing is
yes.
that...
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, the other thing is that, you look at the euro and the eurozone there, and all these countries gave up a great deal of their sovereignty and their ability to manage their own currency. Whenever you take away those tools, then the local government, whether it's in Greece or Portugal or Spain, cannot be as responsive to the people who live there. And that's one of the underlying causes of this unrest.
Robert Evans, would you agree that the banking sector does have a whole lot of responsibility here and could be accused, as I guess they're saying, of actually irresponsibility?
I think the banking sector takes a huge responsibility for this, and the many countries, the people who were at the top of the banks making the decisions have got away with it. They're not being prosecuted for gross professional misconduct. In Ireland, for example, the banks were lending money left, right and centre to people to build new homes and housing estates on the belief that people would come in from other countries. And then as soon as there was the downturn, the people who borrowed the money were just not able to repay the debts, and the buildings remain unfinished. And it's the same in many other countries. And I think the governments of those countries also take some responsibility for the economists and the departments for the exchequer, the treasuries, not looking or not overseeing, not regulating the banks to check that they were doing things more wisely and not over lending. And there are so many examples and models that could be followed around the world. It's quite amazing that these countries are not doing so.
Okay, but
I do agree that the countries...
Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say that the countries of the euro knew when they joined the euro that they were pooling their resources, pooling parts of their economy. And there are countries, of course, that are doing very well out of being in the euro. And I think it's the long term that we'll see how it is successful. I don't for 1 minute think that Spain, Portugal, Greece would be in any better situation if they were pushed out of the euro.
One issue that you referred to there was how policy makers are affecting the situation. Before we go ahead with that question, I'd like to give our viewers a look at one of the comments that has been posted on our Facebook page. We'll take a look at that comment right now by one of our viewers, and we'll be back with the rest of the conversation.
America makes Europe poor. The USA starts a war which is blindly supported by some European countries. As a result, it strains the economy of the eurozone. Unbudgeted for expenditure makes for an ill economy.
A comment by one of our Facebook viewers there. America makes Europe poor. He says the US starts wars which are blindly supported by some European countries. And that brings us to the issue of policy makers. A lot of people, Mike Harris now, this question to you. In the US are saying that authorities are actually accused of providing, for instance, unlimited sums of money for speculators and then table scraps for everyone else. The fact that they're saying that all the money that the US economy can actually produce doesn't go to the middle class but goes upwards. And this is besides the policies on war and foreign policy, etc. What do you think about this?
Well, I think that's absolutely correct. That you look, take for example the TARP bailout. That money was supposed to be given to business in the U.S., middle-sized and small business, and instead the banks held onto the money. They bought treasury bonds, and they went out and acquired their smaller competitors to make their portions, their market share even bigger. So the too big to fail banks are even bigger now, and as I've said previously, they've become a threat to United States national security, because if the banks fail now, the U.S. taxpayer will be on the hook for it. The speculators have no consequences. They're making a lot of money off of this, and the profit goes to the speculators, but the liability goes to the American taxpayer.
Now, let's maybe just refer to some reports and estimates that have been made before I put this question to Robert Evans. Now, Mr. Evans, I'd just like you to take a look at these figures. From 2009, we're hearing, to 2011, the average wealth of America's richest 7% rose nearly 30%. By contrast, the average wealth of America's remaining 93%, some 111 million households, actually dropped by 4%. So do you think that despite these policies that have been adopted, the spending cuts, etc., there is some kind of a problem, something wrong with it, that we're seeing a rise in wealth for the upper class and a vice versa effect for those with less income?
I do agree that there's something wrong with the economy of whether it's the United States, United Kingdom, or many of the other countries where the people at the top see their salaries going up in times of austerity.
So do you say this is something wrong with the economy or something wrong with how policymakers are actually creating these policies? A lot of people are saying this is actually intentional.
I don't know whether, well, if it's not intentional, the governments of the country should do something to stop it. The governments should not allow the big businesses, many of them who rely on state contracts for much of their work, should not allow them to continually increase the salaries of the top executives while reducing those of the hundreds of thousands of millions of workers who are directly related to them. It would be much better if those companies, and the referring to banks, it would be much better if banks were re-lending money instead of sitting on their profits, sitting on the money that they've got. We're actually starting to lend it to small businesses to start up again, which would get economies going and get the unemployment rate down. That's what banks ought to be doing, and they ought to be looking at the small person rather than the people at the top.
And along these lines, we've got a good comment that's been posted on our Facebook page on how policymakers are actually affecting this. Let's take a look at that comment, our last comment for today, and we'll be back.
The basic problem is that policymakers are hooked through different strings to the top of the pyramid. Policymakers, while making policies, look to the top, while the problem lies at the bottom.
So let's bring in Mr. Mike Harris on this. Mr. Harris, some have been saying that the slump, for instance, in Europe will persist because they say EU elites want to achieve their goal, which they say is to, for instance, decimate the social model that provides healthcare, pensions and labour protections for the people in the 17-member Eurozone bloc. And they're saying the same thing about the US. It's basically, this is not something that they want to resolve. Their aim is targeting those social programmes. Now, would you go as far as saying that?
Well, yes, I would. I think that this is nothing more than a greedy money grab by the top 1%. And as my father used to say, the rich get richer and the poor have children. And that's never been more true than today. And you look at our political system in the U.S. and the influence of money, the influence of lobbyists, and the influence that these big banks and big corporations have. Of course, policy is favoring these people because they can afford to hire the very best lobbyists to lobby for their agenda, whereas the poor people are not represented. It's showing the weakness of our democratic republic, and it's showing the weakness of our economic system, where we need to move away from the usury-based system and to move into something that is more social credit-based, or something where the banking is more of a public utility.
So, Ms. Evans, is it about what the politicians want? Because some people are saying they want more privatisation of public assets, more busting up of federal unions, more dismantling of critical safety net programmes. In the US, for instance, Medicare, Medicaid. In the UK, we've been seeing these kinds of programmes also being subject to cuts. So they say that the present policy has actually nothing to do with growing the economy or putting people back to work. What we're seeing is these programmes being targeted, so why should we think otherwise?
I don't for 1 minute think the argument or the way out of this is to reduce spending on health service, whether it's National Health Service in Britain or Medicare in the United States, or support mechanisms for people who are lower down the salary scales and the unemployment. I think the reverse has got to be part and parcel of it. Yes, you've got to have measures to make sure that taxes are collected. Yes, the debt has got to be paid off, but governments have also got to be responsive to the masses of people, the people that Mr. Harris refers to as the poor people, the ordinary people, as well as those who are very poor, have got to be supported, have got to have the protection. And this is why I think the role of trade unions is very, very important, that if we're going to have a social model, social democracy, socialism, which is the way forward, I think, rather than, and the two can work together with in Europe. And I think in the long term, the European model will be seen to be a successful one.
Well, before we run out of time, let's get the conclusion from both of our guests here. Mike Harris, a lot of analysts were saying that once the labour market starts to improve, this will be the positive sign that things are getting better. When do you think that will happen, and how can it happen?
Well, I do not see the labour market improving in the foreseeable future. I see that we have systemic global problems. And let me address one of the issues you mentioned before, and that was privatization of public assets. You need to understand that is theft of the commons. That is theft of assets that are owned by the people. And it's something that they trot out every now and then. The very wealthy want to gain control of the railway system or of the highway system or the utility system that the public has already bought and paid for. And that's just a naked transfer of wealth right there from the public to the private sector. And I cannot support that because it is nothing short of theft.
Right, and quickly, Robert Evans in London, before we run out of time, tell us what you think are the prospects right now for both the eurozone economy and the global economy at large, when we're specifically speaking about the US here.
Clearly times are difficult. In Britain, we've seen really the economy flatlining for some time now. I am optimistic. I think you've got to be optimistic. You've got to think that measures will prove worthwhile in the long run, and you can look at countries where there is some success. I certainly agree with Mr. Harris that selling off the state assets is not the answer, because then you get private companies, the big business people again making money at the ordinary people's expense. Governments have got to accept responsibilities for the mistakes of the banks, for the mistakes of their economical policies, and support the people in the countries, and that means doing everything possible to regenerate employment, whether it's in Spain, Portugal or the United States.
Robert Evans, former chairman of the European Parliamentary Labour Party, with us there from London. Thank you very much. A big thank you to a guest in the US as well, financial editor of Veterans Today, Mike Harris, on the line from Phoenix. Thank you very much for staying with another edition of The Debate. From me, Homa Lesgi, until our next programme, it's goodbye.